Hello and welcome to another video of mine. This time we have a quite special guest, not because it's particularly famous or particularly desirable, but this is the Kiev 5, perhaps the major revamp of the rangefinder era in the ex-Soviet Union. And although I really don't believe it's a rare camera, but it was made in far less numbers than the usual Fed, Zorkis and Kievs. So today let's have a look at the wonderful, weird looking Kiev 5. So let's start by placing the camera historically. So the year was 1967. And Arsenal, which was the factory that made Kiev cameras, came up with this, the Kiev 5. So this is an important camera, not just for the Soviet Union, but for rangefinders in particular, and contacts, for the contacts rangefinder system, the pre-war one. This camera was the last major revamp of this old system, and it has some new features that older Kiev's or original contacts cameras didn't have. Nikon, as you know, was based also around the contact system. They presented the SPX, if I remember correctly, a prototype meant to replace the Nikon SP rangefinder, but it never went ahead in terms of production because by 1960-61, something like that, well, the writing was quite clear on the wall, so the rangefinder era was coming to a dawn. I'm sorry. But the Russians, stubborn as usual, kept developing the rangefinder system because mainly it was state funded and mainly because they didn't have to compete in the professional market or with Nikon or with Leica or Canon. They tried to make a Kiev, TTL Kiev, in 1964-65, something like that, but it never went ahead. But then they came up with this. So, but before we start to have a thorough look at the camera, let's compare it in terms of size, because this is a heavy, big beast. But it's not really alone. There are cameras that are rangefinders and they are not particularly small either. But to start with, let's have a look at the Kiev 2A in this case, because it has a synchro flash port, and or Contax 2, it would have been the same. And so you see that the Kiev 5, although using the same chassis, basically the same body, looks massive and uglier, of course, but in terms of width, it is essentially the same thing because the chassis is the same. But of course the Kiev 2A is much prettier because it's actually a Contax 2. So you can see that this is a very massive camera. This is much lighter. It's heavy, really heavy. But like I was telling you, it's not alone. Let me pick a camera that is almost contemporary, well, about short of 2 years. This is the Canon 7, and you can see that the Canon 7 is also a big camera. And they are equivalent in terms of width, but the Kiev is massive in terms of height, and of course the design is nowhere near the Canon. And to end this part, let's take another ugly duckling that people like so much to beat upon, and that I really like, which is the Leica M6. And compared to the Leica M6, actually the M5, I'm sorry, just finished a film with my M6. And the M5, as you can see, actually is wider than the Kiev, and almost, well, almost as tall, but not quite. So the introduction is made. The Leica is no slim, is not going to win any featherweight contests either. So the Kiev is really not alone in the world of super heavy and large rangefinders. So let's start by describing our Kiev 5. They didn't even bother to make a version, I think, with Roman or Latin characters. So here we are, Kiev 5 in gigantic letters in yellow. So the first thing that you notice is that, let me fetch the little Kiev 2. The famous trademark of the contact system, the focusing wheel, is gone. So no more here. Curiously enough, the Nikon SPX also adopted a new bayonet mount and ditched this system. Frankly, personally, I really don't like to focus here. It doesn't really speed up things, and it is only for the 50mm lens, so it's a really complicated system, and in my opinion it was a very good idea to get rid of it, but that's my idea. So the Kiev got rid of that, I suspect because it didn't make sense, and also it is cheaper, of course, not to have it. Good. So in order to do this, they created a new bayonet mount. So this lens that you see here, which is the Helios 94, is unique to this camera. So in order to use this lens, you have to have, in those days, you had to have Kiev 5. So it's pleasant, quite nice to see that they got away from the venerable Jupiter 8, that was a Zeiss design sonar lens from the 1930s, and went into the modern world with a planar style of lens. So it's a 6-element lens, 1.8, 50, thoroughly modern. It's not multi-coated, unfortunately, but I can tell you that gone absolutely is the Jupiter 8 in terms of softness, lack of contrast. This is a modern lens, and you really wouldn't know if I had used it next to any other rangefinder lens from its day. As you know, I really couldn't care less about image quality, but I did have for you at the end of the video some images taken with this camera. I normally don't do it with interchangeable lens cameras, but as this lens is unique, you cannot use it in another body. So I made a few pics for you to see. It's quite nice, the lens. So you have to put the lens into infinity. It's a pain because I don't speak Russian, I don't read Russian. I found the manual in Russian, but there are many things that escaped me. So infinity, if you want to remove the lens or put it back, just like the old contact system. And there is also an external bayonet mount, exactly like the old system, so it's a dual mount. Internal, like the other, for the 50mm lens, and external for instance, the venerable Jupiter 12, the wide angle that derives from the beer gun and that I particularly dislike. But you see, the camera is fully compatible with every single lens designed for Contax cameras except the 50mm. Okay, 50mm lenses are really not accepted by the Kiev 5. It's a shame. Well, no, except perhaps for this lens, because this is the Helios 103 1.853 that was also made for the older Contax system and cannot be used here. So the lens is huge. People say the lens is the same. I really don't know. They don't seem to be the same. This is really a very, very large lens with a very weird coupling to the rangefinder and weird bayonet mount, weird everything as usual with Russian cameras. So let's put it back and always make sure that it's in infinity focusing, otherwise it just won't mount. Okay, so what else is new? So no focusing wheel, a brand new lens that is quite good and modern. It focused to 90 centimeters, just like any other lens, rangefinder lens in this case. So the super wide base rangefinder is gone, remember, but still a very respectable distance between the viewfinder window and the rangefinder window. I'm glad, because you have to adopt a certain shooting ergonomy with the Contax or Kiev cameras or Nikon cameras in order not to obstruct this window. So it's good because the camera still retains a very accurate rangefinder. As you can see, there is a meter. Yay. So it's not the first time Contax had it. Of course Kiev's had it because they were Contax made Soviet cameras. So they adopted a Selenium Meter, unfortunately, not CDS. This one doesn't work, so we'll not waste your time going around how it works. It's really ungainly, it's really not beautiful to look at. Yeah, but it is what we have. We have got a needle and every indication is outside, not inside the viewfinder. Another modification or difference between this camera and the old Contax cameras is that the top shutter speed here only goes to 1/1000th of a second. Here it used to go to 1,205th of a second, at least on these models, because later models, as quality went downhill, they reduced shutter speed to 1,000th of a second. But of course the big news is the presence of a lever to advance the film. Yay! Instead of the knob that you see here. Or do you? Because the Kiev 5 is really a very weird camera and it's a dual system in terms of film advance. So you've got lever, which you can use, or if you prefer, you can still use the knob to advance the film. Well, I hate knobs. I hate knobs for advancing the film. I hate knobs to rewind the film. So I really wasn't born in the 1930s or anything, so I'm not used to them. Never did like cameras that use such a system. So, but it is quite amusing to see a camera using the double system. That's why we've got this weirdly shaped mushroom button. So it's let me just reduce exposure here. So it's different. It's refreshingly different, and it works. There is a trim, a bit of trim missing here. I have it, but it was loose, so I removed it to find a way to put it back that didn't involve gluing it, and I store it somewhere, and now I can't find it. But you choose the shutter speed where this screw is, and you got all the standardized shutter speeds. Here, for the first time in the contacts of the two, you have an automatic frame counter, you know, resetting to 0 when you remove this. Yes, there is no door, hinged door, which is a shame. And while you are here on the top, you may see that this is the calculator, exposure calculator for the Selenium Meter, as this one doesn't work. Will not be wasting your time by going through it. But you can see Arsenal's symbol and the year of build of this camera, which is 1971. Now, another very nice feature for people like me, I wasn't even born when the Kiev was launched, but I was already a baby when this camera was made. So it was like Kiev had heard me saying when I was a baby that I didn't like knobs. So they thought, well, in 50 years' time, Paulo is going to make a video saying lots of horrible, awful things about us, so let's put some stuff that he likes. So they've put this rewind crank here on the side, which is really, really very elegant. It's elegantly designed, brilliantly engineered, as you are going to see. And so it's everything that normally Russian cameras aren't, especially when they don't derive or copy something from the West. And you see, this crank is articulated, so it folds, and then it's very neat. It's expensive, the amount of metalworking involved here, and this idea. And of course, this is not directly connected to the spindle, to the film. So there is a gear or a U-shaft or whatever they have used inside, I have no idea. So this is by no means a cheap system, so very nice. Like I could have done this. Instead they chose on the M4 to put the rewind crank BA'd, in a BA's position, so that it could fit. Well, this is very clean, very nice design. Speaking of cleanliness, the bottom is pure Kiev of the time. Gone is the little detail that stopped the camera from falling over to the lens. So it's a simplification, but basically it is the same thing. Good. Now, one, or perhaps the most notorious difference is the viewfinder. As you can see, even from here, I can't show you the inside. It's big, and I can tell it's very bright. It has one projected frame lines. It's not etched, it's projected, so like a style. And although you can read on the internet that some cameras have the automatic parallax correction, this one hasn't. One that a friend of mine also doesn't have, so I don't know if they have it or if at some moment stopped doing it, or if it was just present in the prototype. Now, this viewfinder has absolutely nothing to do with any previous rangefinder camera, Leica style, that you have used in the past. So there is absolutely no comparison between the viewfinder of the Kiev 5 and the viewfinder of any other Kiev, any other Zorki whatsoever, much less a FET. So this is really a big viewfinder, on par with Nikon's rangefinders at the time. It's not like a bright, of course. It's different from Canon's approach. For instance, the Canon 7 viewfinder is very, very, very nice because you can select frame lines. Here you just have one frame line, which is for 50mm, and the rest of the viewfinder you should use it for the 35mm, and it works. I did it and it works a treat. But there are no other markings for other lenses. In my case, no need, because I think rangefinders are made to be used with wide angles and standard lenses, but especially wide angles, as you know. I am a fan of wide angles. So this viewfinder has a very clear patch. The frame line is yellow, very visible, very contrasty. So this is very un-Soviet-like. Don't get me wrong, this is not a bargain Leica, no, nothing comes close to an M viewfinder from cameras of this era, but for what it is, it's really very, very nice. But of course, beware of the exaggerations that some people write in the internet about the viewfinder. So this is not M bright. It has nothing to do with M cameras, so it's much more like a Nikon rangefinder, like I told you, or a very top of the range and Japanese rangefinder from the 60s, which is really a big thing. I think it's really fantastic. Having said that, let's look at the interior, the film chamber of our Kiev 5. So the original contact system. So they didn't have the money to go all the way and find a way to make a door, hinged door. And so you can see the old contacts shutter, the vertical run. It's very smooth and very silent. Of course, here it is less because there's no film. The door is out. As you can see, the film goes here, and either you have the spool for it, the original spool, as this camera didn't come with the original spool. This is just a spool taken from a film canister that I have to glue with sticky tape. Well, advance, the frame spacing here is, some people report some problems. Well, it's very thin. I had some problems with another spindle. The negatives would overlap. But with this one, finally, I had no trouble whatsoever. So all the negatives were perfectly exposed and there was no overlapping. But anyway, the distance between the frames here is really millimetrical. I mean, literally, it's 1 millimeter or something. It's either a fault of my camera, but it's very, very close indeed. So, but still, it works. I think one has to be very careful when inserting the door, because if you don't do it correctly, the spindle that goes into an axle doesn't let you close the door properly, and that leads to erratic spacing, as you can see, and light leaks. So I'm not ashamed to tell you that I've been there. I know that those mistakes, you pay them dearly. So don't make them as I did. Well, this is indeed a really heavy camera. Having trouble in showing you with just one hand. So, what are my thoughts about the Kiev 5? I really like this camera. But you must bear in mind that I also love the Leica M5, so weird cameras that nobody likes. I like the Canon 7S, as you know. No, I don't particularly like big cameras, but I have to concede that rangefinder with some girth, weight, it's always nicer to use, especially this one, because it's so heavy and ugly and nobody really cares. But when you're taking pictures at slow speeds, it's very difficult to take a blurred or shaky picture with this camera because of its girth. The weight really compensates, and the shutter is amazingly silent. So I really like the camera because of that. The viewfinder is really very, very nice. The lens is a modern lens, so if you're looking for the bokeh, swirly, blah, 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 well, you have to look elsewhere. Of course, unfortunately, the lens is not multi-coated, and it can show sometimes because when you take pictures with intense light, but pictures are very contrasty, results are really very contrasty, which is not the case with the Helios or the Jupiter 8 or the Jupiter 12. This Helios is really nice, so is the other one, the Helios 103. So I really was very surprised about this camera, because mainly it corrects all the faults of the old Contax camera. I really I like the Contax for what it meant, but the viewfinder of the Contax 2 is not a modern viewfinder. It was amazing for the 1930s, having combined rangefinder, viewfinder, a big base, and a big viewfinder for its day. But it really is a pain to use compared to this one. So I really liked it. The lack of a meter here, or a working meter, for me, it's really indifferent. I don't use meters with this sort of camera. So I am really very happy with this Kiev. I do have a soft spot for Soviet cameras, as you know. Rangefinder cameras. I really don't like the reflex cameras, not even by Kiev. But the rangefinder cameras are really interesting, and I use them a lot, and I am not ashamed to have a Zorki 3 on my shoulder with a Russian or a Japanese lens, or even a Leica lens. Really couldn't care less of what people say if I feel at ease with it. So I have some pictures to show you next. They are black and white, and as you know, all my style is based on street. So I like street photography. That's what I do as a hobby, of course. And all my opinions about the Kiev, it's about its suitability as a camera for street photography, which, in my opinion, thumbs up, because it's very silent. It's so ugly that it passes, well, people look, but they really don't care because they don't know what it is. And this lens really is very nice. The trouble with the Kiev system is that it's a pain to find cheap lenses for it. So you either stick to things like this, or you go for Nikon lenses, which obviously are very expensive, or you go to Carl Zeiss lenses, which again obviously are very expensive. Although Cosina, Voigtlander, they have made a batch in this mount, but I don't think they are easy to find and not particularly cheap. So the Kiev system is not as universal as the Leica L39 mount, and certainly not cheap to use. If you try to find Russian lenses below 35mm, that will cost you too. So you have to bear that in mind if you want to have this camera as a shooter. Also be prepared that it's based on the Contax system, meaning that you have a complex shutter, meaning that it's not going to work forever, needs servicing. And I have a friend who really thrives on repairing contacts shutters, so he's really likes them and really knows them, and is not scared to work on them. But most people are, so be very careful and consider before paying a lot of money for one of these. Well, thank you very much for watching. Now you've got those famous pictures. If you have any comments or any doubts, please write in the comment box. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you very soon in another video of mine.